So I kind of wanted to go into something that I think is just very important when it comes to the arguments for the existence of God. I'm certain that many of you have heard of the Kalam cosmological argument, and I've been actually reading a bit of this book, which is Return of the God Hypothesis. I've been really enjoying it. It's by Stephen C. Meyer, who is a philosopher of science and also a historian, practically a historian of science. He is very wise. He himself, of course, is a Christian, but he, in this specific book, goes over how we came to the idea of I guess the not just the Big Bang, but pretty much the God hypothesis. To think that there is a God behind the universe, because it's always been for a very long time a very I would say a very powerful argument, but we never really had anything other than philosophy and some very that's even it. We didn't really have like a really deep science, or at least any more like physical evidence. And this is I mean we did, but it was a lot of philosophy. And so with the discovery of the Big Bang in the past century, we really have a lot more concrete evidence for the existence of a supernatural being. And simply, it goes like this: if space, matter, time, and energy all began at one point, then the cause for those things cannot be those things. It has to be without time, has to be without matter, has to be without space, and has to have lots of energy, just in accordance with the definition of energy. Lots of power. And that would lead you to believe to not like a superhuman necessarily, but a supernatural being, something that goes beyond nature, because a superhuman still is limited to nature, is still a natural thing, but an unnatural thing, a supernatural thing, a supernatural being, which that's where the idea is that God actually exists. Now, one might wonder if possibly there is something beyond or behind the Big Bang. I think, first of all, understanding the Big Bang actually helps you to come to grips with why that doesn't really make too much sense. Second of all, science is very limited in the things that are material. You have forensic science, and then you also have empirical. When we have some empirical science when it comes to the Big Bang, which I'm very thankful for, but we also have some forensic, and but we do have quite a bit of empirical, which is why it is widely believed and taught that there was, in fact, a Big Bang to the universe. I'm not saying that this automatically shows that God does exist, but it is certainly good evidence, and there is certainly a good argument for the existence of a creator. Also, not necessarily the God of the Bible, but certainly, and I know Frank Turek argues this as well, and even other Christian apologists, but it is specifically arguing for a more theistic God with some degree of personhood, because it requires that degree of person to choose to create, and especially with what has been created, for instance, beauty and love. And so those attributes, or I guess characteristics, must come from something that has a degree of not just personhood, but also personality, which requires a person. So that's really the basic version of the Kalam cosmological argument. And I really started to understand the Big Bang a little bit more when I started reading this book. I have understood it mostly, and why the special theory of relativity and even the theory of relativity are really important to it, and why Einstein's field equations are involved in understanding it, because it's really just understanding the curvature of space and time. And it's basically the Big Bang, you understand in that we've discovered that it is expanding constantly and almost like a funnel. And so if you turn back the clock in this ever expanding universe, it goes down to a finite point in time in singularity where it falls into infinite density, because the density in the universe only gets higher and higher as you compact it further and further until it reaches infinity. And so that reaches then a point of zero spatial volume. In other words, there's nothing left. Let me just read this from Stephen Meyer. To get my students to recognize, now this is page 116 of Return to the God Hypothesis. To get my students to recognize the profundity of this result, I used to ask them, how much stuff can you put in no space? They would quickly realize that the answer to this question is none, or no stuff. Literally, you can't put anything into no space. If at some point in the past space ceased to exist, then there would not at that point have been any place to put anything. Whether matter or energy, indeed, neither matter nor energy can exist in the absence of space and time. Thus, Hawking, Ennis, and Penrose's singularity proofs implied that a material universe of infinite density began to exist some finite time ago, starting from nothing, or at least from nothing spatial, temporal, material, or physical, because those things came into existence. It is possible, of course, that mathematics, it's possible in a face value sense that maybe math did this, but math does not have creative power. This is why you have, for instance, Stephen Meyer or even other Christian philosophers positing a mind, a very powerful mind, but of course this mind would have a degree of personhood and would essentially have a soul and would be a spirit. But the intelligence, of course, you have the mind and the workings of the mind, and minds create ideas all the time. So minds have a degree of creative power. How ultimately you have something that is, you have ideals being put into something, or having it create something physical. Well, first of all, if the laws do not exist before this time, then it doesn't really matter, because the being ultimately puts those laws into action in the first place. So this being is already doing things that we as humans could not comprehend. We can apprehend these ideas, but that's kind of the point of a God, is that we don't really understand exactly what he does and can do. Instead, we kind of start to realize, oh, this is an extremely powerful being that surpasses not just us, but also the universe itself and all the powers within. So a mind that can do that essentially is God. It's not simplifying or complicating. It's just one way to say that God is the one behind it. It's just mind is a fun way to say it. I want to read a little more just to kind of have you guys possibly get some more grasp on what I'm getting from this and the Big Bang itself, because I think understanding it keeps you away from things like the oscillating universe, or even, I think multi-universes are possible, but I think, or I guess the multiverse, I think that's very possible, but I don't think an oscillating universe, certainly, I don't think that really is, which I think actually comes from Hinduism. I think they were the first ones to come up with that. Keep hitting my mic. Of course, thinking about the cosmological singularity can generate paradoxical or seemingly contradictory conclusions. One might also assert, for example, that the universe began from an enormous amount of mass energy and infinitely strong gravitational field, since at the singularity, the mass energy density and the strength of the gravitational field would also have approached infinity. Even so, the singularity theorems do not permit one to posit mass energy or gravitational field as an eternal self-existing entity, since prior to the singularity, neither time nor space existed in our universe. And without space, mass energy would have no place to reside. In other words, however much mass energy existed from the beginning of the universe, it had to arise with the beginning of time and space, both of which began in a finite time ago. And this is really Einstein's special theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, and that's a special theory of relativity? It should be. Yes, it should be. Even so, you essentially have space, matter, time, and energy that's all correlative. M, of course, is mass. E is for energy. And then the speed of light represents space and time. It's essentially, it's space and time. And they all need to exist at the same time in order to exist. They all need to come into existence at the same time in order to exist. You can't have one without the other. They're all related. And this is the science that we know. So that means that neither of them could have essentially done this work because they didn't exist. None of them did. None of them existed at this point. And again, they all need each other in order to exist. Thus, a spatial or temporal singularity prevents, as Davies noted, any physical reasoning about a prior state of the universe through such an extremity, and thus that extremity does mark the beginning of the physical universe itself. Taken at face value, the philosophical implications of a cosmological singularity are staggering. At the very least, a universe that begins in a space-time singularity poses an acute challenge to any materialistic theory of the origin of the universe. He doesn't say that it completely overrides them, because this is the thing with all philosophy and science, is that it's evidence. It's not automatically proof. That's all science. It's never actually proof. There's still some things that we don't know and don't understand, but we hold those things to be true. We hold those things to be true because of the reasons that we have. So, for instance, like laws, it's not that those laws couldn't be disproven, because they could, but we've also discovered them. So it's very likely that they're not, but human beings are flawed, and so we can get those things wrong, and the understandings that we have. But I think that kind of creates an important distinction between what we are able to understand and the mistakes we often make, and then what the universe is actually doing and what actually is going on in the system. We can try and interpret it in our way, and we may very well get it right, but we also may very well get it wrong. And that's why we have things like falsifying, and that's even why Christians came up with that, is because it's assumed that we're flawed, and so we need to do that with our science. So that's the same with even the Big Bang Theory. It could be false, but it's very reasonable to think that it is true, and that there was actually a beginning to space, matter, time, and energy. Continuing on, indeed, a singularity implies that not only space and time, but also matter and energy first arose at the beginning of the universe, before which no such entities would have existed that could have caused the universe to originate. Moreover, insofar as the space-time singularity marks the point of origin of the universe from nothing physical, cosmological models based on solutions to the field equations of general relativity seem strangely reminiscent. Oh, I see. General relativity, not special. Okay, I think I'm getting them both mixed up, but what theologians long described in doctrinal terms as creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. Hawken and Ellis themselves addressed the issue of the creation of the universe in the conclusion of their 1973 book. And they reflected the creation of the universe out of nothing has been argued indecisively from early times. See, for example, Kant's first Anatomy of Pure Reason. The results we have obtained support the idea that the universe began a finite time ago. However, the actual point of creation, the singularity, is outside the presently known laws of physics. And that's very true. Science can only go so far. It can't go past what it literally is incapable of doing. I think that we can understand more of singularities But I think, excuse me, pardon me, it probably just made everybody yawn. But that doesn't mean that we'll be able to fully understand singularities, because there really is this complexity to them that science is just incapable of reaching. And the reason that I don't think that an oscillating universe works in this sense, where you have a big bang after a big bang after a big bang, and eventually we get to current, is for three specific reasons. And one of them is we don't have evidence for that. From what we have of the Big Bang, that's what we have. There is certainly more and more that is being discovered consistently, but there's no reason to think that this is happening, at least nothing concrete. Maybe some philosophy and some interesting theoretical physics, nothing concrete for certain, and disputed theoretical physics. I think that's about as far as it goes. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong. And so because of that, real science, we don't argue from what we don't have. We argue from what we do have. So there's no evidence. That's essentially my claim. It's a positive claim. I'm claiming there's no real evidence for an oscillating universe. It's interesting because Roger Penrose said, I think it was like 2011, just trying to understand like possibly the origin of the Big Bang and the cause for it. And he came to the conclusion that there is a specific math formula that can almost like fill in the blank. But then he realized that, first of all, math doesn't have any creative properties or power, but it also is always dependent on a mind. And so he just kind of like, in his book, he just like, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, am I positing like a mind behind the universe or something like that, or a mind created the universe? And then he just kind of like stops there. I think he like says like it's just not comfortable to think about, or like it's not something he would dare consider. I forget exactly his quote. I'm just kind of loosely quoting Roger Penrose here, trying to interpret the Big Bang. And so it that's about as far as it goes, that a very possible mathematical equation. But again, math is always dependent on a mind. So if God essentially gave math at a specific instance creative properties, or rather created a mathematical equation that we can actually see and understand, and then put all that into action, like it's almost like then it's very specifically the language of God. Mathematics is really the language of God in that sense, if that is true, which would be super cool. So I guess that's just one piece. And then the second is that the known laws that we have don't give us any reason to think that there is a universe behind our universe. In fact, it shows that our universe currently is very finite. Let me check on my recording real quick. All right, sweet. It's recording. It stopped earlier because it dropped a frame. But anyways, so science is always about what we have and not what we don't have. We can have theoretical physics for certain, but that's why we go further and we actually try to we test. Right? I think it's we test, we retest, we hypothesize, and then we attempt to falsify. Maybe I'm totally forgetting how the order of the scientific method, but basically picking apart and trying to understand, and then making a possible opinion, and then attempting to falsify that with other things and other tests that we do. And from there, you don't have that reasoning, you don't have that science. I mean, you might have some ideas that are out there, and maybe just because, and maybe even some interesting arguments, but an interesting philosophical argument doesn't create good science. And that's something we need to realize even for the multiverse. There's no real evidence for it. There's some interesting things that are curious, but that's about, again, as far as it goes. The universe is so organized in a way that we can understand it and grasp it. And I would say that's another reason that we should believe that God exists, because we can understand it, and it's also finite. It's contingent. It cannot exist in itself because it's finite, because it's limited. And so I would say that an infinite being is a perfect answer for what we have, or at the very least with lots and lots of power that is immaterial, spaceless, timeless, and is personal and has the characteristics that we have in the universe that are not abstract, but metaphysical. And then the third argument would be that the amount of entropy, or the low amount of entropy required in order for the Big Bang to even happen, in terms of digits or decimal points, is more than we have atoms in the universe. I believe it's 1 over 10 to the 1023rd power, if I'm getting that correct, which is an inconceivable number in terms of how small it needs to be, and just how many digits there are. This really shows that the control required for the universe to begin, this is only one piece, really, of the teleological argument, which I'm not going to really go too deep into. It requires essentially an extremely powerful being, one that has this level of control and also care. And that's why people will posit the multi-universe, because it's just spitting them out kind of infinitely. Like, that's great, but then really, where does that multiverse come from? That's kind of the question. Why is that there? Like, sure, you're putting that in, but that's adding more complexity than what is necessary. That's not the simplest answer. At this point, almost, we kind of have reached this area in science that God is just the simplest answer. It checks all of the boxes. It's perfectly scientific, perfectly philosophically, perfect with mathematics, perfect with so much of we know and understand it. It doesn't actually break any ideas or laws. It's not trying to be overly complex. It's, again, we're just trying to fill in. We're trying to check these boxes, not necessarily God of the gaps, but just like this is literally what we see. Like, this is literally the best answer we got anymore. That's my opinion, of course, but I wonder if you guys agree. Please leave a comment below. I thought that some of this stuff was interesting, just some like little nuggets. That's kind of what I like to do with these videos. And I hope that you guys will think about some of these things, maybe look up some of the things I was talking about. Look at Stephen Meyer's book. You can even look at some of the lectures he gives. He's very fun to listen to, because he's very educated and well-spoken, but he also pauses and stutters sometimes, so much like a scientist. He's so fun to listen to. But I hope that you guys hopefully learn some things. Certainly, I'm not a scientist or a philosopher, but just some little stuff to kind of bring up. And of course, some of my opinions. Hey, God bless you all. I hope you have an amazing day.